This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex, and for more information, go to www.pivex.org. Hello and welcome to Token TV Plus, another episode coming your way today with me, Tom White, and of course Cryptosi is alongside me as ever, but the special guest today, the man that needs the introduction far more than me and Cryptosi, that is Paul Schmizer, the Director of Communications for Particl. Paul, welcome along and thank you for coming on.
Hi, well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited.
And I hear you've got a kind of is it a Twitter name or crypto name? Is it LiteBit? Is that right?
LiteBit. Yep.
LiteBit. Sorry. Right. Okay. So the LiteBit. Where does that come from? What do you prefer? Do you prefer Paul or LiteBit?
Paul's fine. Yeah, LiteBit is just something. I've been in crypto for a long time, and with the two coins that I started on right away, it was right when Litecoin was starting. So Bitcoin and Litecoin, and it's just kind of a mashup of that.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we'll get onto that a little bit later on then, because I was going to start by asking you what your kind of working background was prior to crypto. Yeah.
Well, I kind of come from someplace not in crypto or related to it at all. I'm actually a licensed architect. So I design healthcare facilities, hospitals, adult and children hospitals for around 20 years. It's something I always wanted to do when I was little. Got into Legos and drawing, and that's sort of what I always wanted to do and got into that. What some of the cool stuff from that relates really well to crypto is that, you learn how to problem solve. We're always dealing with clients, with marketing and, trying to figure out exactly what they want for their hospitals, what that experience wants to be. And so you come up with ways for it to look, but also how it functions, how it, and just kind of the whole experience of it. And along the way, you pick up, really good problem solving skills. And that in a way lent itself to something along the way that I picked up, which was just kind of the entrepreneur bug. So I kind of got into some of that stuff and, kind of led down the path of other things down the future.
It's really interesting hearing you say that and talking about your background, but how, I can't think how that would then take you into crypto.
Yeah, there's not a, direct correlation there. Just being part of the early adopters of the space, I just got into the, ways to help volunteer however I could in the early parts of Bitcoin and Litecoin and some other early privacy coins. And that, I was able to at least take, specifically for what I do with Particl, take that marketing background or just being able to, come up with strategies and proposals and different things that I do in my normal job and be able to relate that to actual startup situation or in our case, like some cryptocurrency projects.
It's really interesting because on Token TV Plus, we've spoken to loads of people over the last few months, and their backgrounds are so different. I mean, we had someone on who was a pastor. His sort of previous role was within the church. Does this just go to show that it doesn't really matter what your background is? There is a place for you in the crypto world.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something very interesting about it. And when you start getting into it, you'll hear this story a lot that just so many people just get drawn down into that rabbit hole and you want to see how far it goes. There's just something really intriguing. I think it's just the future, kind of excitement of this is what is going to happen in the future, and you just want to learn more and more about it, no matter what your background.
Yeah, we mentioned Particl at the start, which you're involved in. There'll be a lot of people who don't know what that is. So what is it and how did it come to exist?
So Particl, yeah, that's the project I'm on. And it actually, we started Particl in the first part of last year, around March or April. And it was actually from the same team that started Shadow Cash. which was an early privacy project that started around 2014. And they had done a whole bunch of work with that on Bitcoin's code base, similar to stuff that was going on in Monero at the time before they had Ring CT, but dealing with ring signatures and different privacy tech. And so the team was doing that and, working towards building a decentralized marketplace and end-to-end encryption tools. And I kind of got involved in that more on the investor side, but then became part of the community. And I was never involved in Shadow Cache, but as we started getting into, the team had met up. There was some concerns with Shadow Cache just with the naming, similar to how Darkcoin rebranded to Dash, and you'll see some of that. If we were going to take this project mainstream, there's some things that need to happen, some steps that need to be done, and maybe even a big pivot, just in startup terms, that had to happen for that to do. So I was brought in as part of the community person, just really involved to help be part of that pivot, which was basically to shut down Shadow Cache. We had met with a handful of advisors that were large investors in the project. It was an open source project, it wasn't an ICO or anything. It was just a cryptocurrency project, but there were some big hands that were involved and they wanted to see more from it. But so they kind of helped advise us to pivot and basically stop Shadow Cache and stop that where it was. It was a successful project. At the time, it was a top 30 cryptocurrency coin. But to do something crazy, but for a reason, and stop that project, and then start up Particl, which would be built off the newest Bitcoin, would be different privacy. It would not have the history of Shadow Cache, so it would be its own blockchain. It would have a different privacy cryptography that was more improved. It was a newer code base, so we could keep it up to date for security. And so that was kind of like the big pivot. And then the only way that you could get Particl to start was you had to have Shadow Cache in the past. So it wasn't an ICO, it was a token exchange. And that's sort of the whole idea with that was basically to have a brand, instead of trying to build a dApps or this marketplace on like a Windows 95 version of Bitcoin, we were going to start with a brand new chain, the newest updated Bitcoin, which had SegWit. So we had all our transactions were SegWit. We had, the newest security stuff with scaling, some of the scaling things that they had worked on. We actually brought in confidential transactions. So we did a whole bunch of stuff. We were able to do that from the start. And that's sort of how Particl started. It was basically to make a complement to Bitcoin that was a more private version of it. Not something to compete necessarily, but something complementary. Since we're proof of stake, we're not mining coin, so we're not taking miners from Bitcoin. We stay up to date. Within a week or two of their release, we're releasing the same update onto ours. And then we have a lot of their research, like for confidential transactions and privacy, actually, that's not on Bitcoin yet, but that's on our chain. So it's a nice complement in a privacy way.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense, actually. It's very, very impressive. I'm going to bring Cryptosi in a minute, but I noticed you mentioned how before it wasn't ICO. What was the thinking behind that? And would that not have benefited you in some way beforehand?
Yes, it would have. I mean, looking back, there were a lot of things probably we would have changed in how we started it. It was right before the ERC20 kind of rush of all these ICOs. So while we were building the chain, all these other things were getting started on ERC20 and raising a lot of funds. We had met with a lot of legal advisors, and we have a couple legal teams actually, and they're with some of the stuff we wanted to do, not just be a currency that's traded and really that's all that you can do with it is, just working on exchanges. We had a whole bunch of plans. They suggested that we, just do this exchange, bring on all that back history, but it's on a new chain, allow people to swap, and about 80% of the network swapped. Some people didn't. A good 20% didn't swap into Particl. That was it was a month-long swap, and then a year-long process to get all the rest of the people that didn't hit that month. But basically, I think, the only way we had money, we basically took donations in Bitcoin during that, where you could get maybe a 10% more Particl. And the goal with that was to use that funds to deliver the alpha marketplace, which is, what we've delivered for that. So we didn't do a huge fund to fund the project for a number of years, but when we started, we set aside 1 million part, which is probably about 10% of all the Particl out there. There's maybe about 9 million. And so 1 million of those was locked until we had a mainnet version of our marketplace. And then that would allow us to do future funding to actually continue work on the marketplace or do other things. So really the initial thing was to bring over the old community and to get donations to be able to finish this marketplace. And then from there, we're almost to that point where we can actually look at doing a fundraise too. So that's sort of a roundabout way, I guess. But
yeah,
I guess another point just real quick with that is that that brings up a question of why we did this on Bitcoin and Ethereum. And at the time when we did this, and I think it's been proven now with so many ICOs on Ethereum, that, Bitcoin's been battle tested. It's been studied and worked on and developed, and it's got the best development team. And so there were a lot of bonuses and, pros to build this actually on our own chain than being on Ethereum, where it was easy to issue tokens to raise money, but then we're stuck on a chain that potentially a whole bunch of ICOs are actually starting their prototypes on, and you could have a lot of congestion that you see, different things like that. So we definitely, we weighed the options with doing it on Ethereum or doing our own chain and ways that could work with fundraising. But it came down to really the code base, which, you really can't beat Bitcoin's, just the solid nature of the code,
Yeah, it's clear that you've really kind of, you thought it through, and that's you're reaping the benefits of that. I just want to ask you if it's possible to explain without being too technical, like Ring CT and what makes it one of the most respected privacy technologies in crypto.
Yes, yeah, I can do that. Try to keep that super simple. Well, I'll start with just what a basic transaction on crypto would be like if it was in Bitcoin. And so a typical Bitcoin transaction, you have one sender, say Alice, sends money to Bob, and Bob's the signer. So, Alice sends it, Bob signs for it. That's a typical transaction. There's another feature of that where you can add stealth addresses, and stealth addresses would just protect Alice's identity. So there's some, that's just a general thing. Bitcoin can do that and other projects can do that, but you can get a pseudo-anonymous privacy that way, where Alice, until Bob spends that, until he spends that token, her privacy's protected just with that stealth address. Okay, so that's just the basic, that's how 99% of all the cryptos work. What we've done, and Monero, obviously was the first to do Ring CT, but Ring CT is ring signatures and confidential transactions. And I'll break both down just simply. So ring signatures, they protect the sender's privacy, similar to a stealth address. But in this case, when the output gets spent, Alice's identity is not revealed, because, if she just uses a stealth address, then, once that stealth address is, spent, then you can kind of link it together. A ring signature protects her privacy by pairing it up with a number of other potential signers. So if Alice wants to send Bob a transaction, she sends it to him, but Bob's mixed in with 4 or 5 other potential signers. So it's not just her sending it to him, it's her sending it to a pool of potential signers. And that signer is never really identified in that. So Bob's mixed in with that, but even if he were to spend it, you weren't sure where it actually came from. So this is ring CT or ring signatures, sorry, and that makes the basics of that to remember is just that that transaction is now unlinkable. So in Bitcoin, transactions are linkable. You could actually say this address sent money to this address, and then this address spent it to here, and through the whole chain life of that wherever that Bitcoin goes, you can actually backtrack it, and you've seen that with the Mt. Gox, backtracking that they've been able to do and identify. So it's pseudo-anonymous. But with ring signatures, that transaction now is unlinkable, which means that the address, Alice's address and Bob's address are not linked. So that's the link's broken. And then confidential transactions, the second part of that, and basically confidential transaction, the main goal of it is to hide the amount. So if you just use ring signatures, which is even what Shadowcash did in the past, or what Monero used to do prior to 2017 with ring CT, even though they were breaking the link between the addresses, the amounts were there, which means that that coin is still traceable. So there's linkability and traceability. And so confidential transactions comes in and basically hides that amount. So you can't see if Alice sends to Bob, not only is their address broken where nobody knows that Bob's, was paid by Alice for whatever reason. They don't know how much he was actually paid. So the simplicity of ring CT, I guess, just as a quick, what does it do? It breaks the linkability and traceability of transactions. So no longer can you trace the coin through the history of its life when it breaks down into smaller bits or whatever, and you can't trace the address, or you can't link the addresses to where they are. So it's a complicated thing, but I hope that sort of shows, the difference between the first example, which was a Bitcoin transaction, and the ring CT transaction, where nothing is, you break the linkability and traceability.
No, you've explained that really well. Does that all make sense to you, Cryptosi?
Yeah. I'm pretty familiar. Obviously, from my time in PivX, I'm pretty familiar with ring CT because it's kind of like the other, or one of the three most respected privacy protocols that there are in crypto. So, yeah, I've always had a lot of respect for Monero and what they've done, and the same with Particl. So yeah, it's a great technology. It really is.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex, and for more information, go to www.pivx.org. Okay, decentralized marketplaces have been done before. What makes this one different from something like OpenBazaar?
Okay, yeah, you're right. So we're definitely not the first movers into the decentralized marketplace. And there's OpenBazaars. And I guess I would just say this, there's always competition. But in I think the way we market and the way we communicate to our people is not necessarily that we're better than these guys. Obviously, they're competition, but that all of these decentralized marketplaces are offering an option, a new choice for people versus the centralized setups that's everywhere, So that's just a caveat in there. But to say how we're different from each, there's just five things. There's five things that that came to mind when I was thinking about this, and I'll go over them really fast. But so the first thing for us that Particl's different is that we're not backed by a for-profit company. So we're not for profit. Particle's sponsored by the Particl Foundation, which is just a nonprofit that, the Particl teams have actually the only team being supported by that, but the way that the foundation was set up is that it can support multiple privacy projects, not even for Particl or built on Particl. But anyway, so the Particl Foundation is a nonprofit. So basically the Particl team doesn't hold any Particl except, you know, what we personally would own. The foundation owns all of that. We don't claim any fees from the products we create. We don't charge fees. Everything's open source. We don't have any private repos. Everything's open source. So there's nothing protected. You know, in my mind, you know, for OpenBazaar as an example, OB1 is their controlling company, and similar for Syscoin, which is Block Market. I think Block Foundry is part of that, and so there's some closed source parts of that project. So that's a big one, not for profit. Passive income. OpenBazaar runs on a multiple currencies. Bitcoin's what it started on, but you can basically duplicate all of your servers and have a whole bunch of servers running a different coin for each. Particl has a native token. So what that means is that there's passive income that can come from that. So all of the transactions that happen on the marketplace, all the fees that are generated from that actually can go to people that are working for the network for consensus, which, you know, would be staking. So you could even actually never get into the marketplace. You could be staking, you know, you could have Particl in your wallet and hooked up online and actively staking, basically meaning your wallet's online, and you could never get into the marketplace. You could never buy or sell or do any of that, and you could still be making fees or earning income off of the marketplace fees, which is pretty cool. You can't do that on, you know, eBay or Amazon. You have to actively be a buyer or seller in there. The third thing would be governance. So Particl Marketplace is different than OpenBazaar in that, you know, what we're trying to do, and this kind of ties into my other point, which is trustless, is that we are building something that's just between two people. The same way, the simplicity that we all fell in love with Bitcoin, which was Alice dealing with Bob and nobody else involved. That's what we're trying to do with the Particl Marketplace. OpenBazaar actually has moderators, and those moderators can charge a fee. And those moderators, to be honest, if they're identified, they could never come back online. And if you have an issue, your sale will never be completed unless the moderator okays it, you know, or if they work out the issues with it. So they're gaining a fee, plus they could potentially sabotage the whole transaction. And these are just people that are third parties, which we think are, you know, superfluous. You don't need, if I want to sell something to somebody, the two of us should be able to work it out. And so what Particl does is we use some smart contracts or scripts, and Bitcoin, they're scripts, but we use that to create a MAD escrow, which is a two-party trustless escrow, which basically is mutually assured destruction, is what MAD stands for. And it's similar to the theory of that's actually active right now with all the nuclear, the people that have nuclear arms. It's basically a game theory which was developed, and it basically means, you know, Russia, you know, or in America or whoever, you know, China and whoever, those guys know that it's like a mutually assured destruction. We know that even if we don't trust you, we know that everything's going to be okay, because once we, you know, do something, you're going to, you know, it's going to retaliate. So basically our two-party trustless escrow is the same way, is that everybody's got skin in the game. So the logic is that they would work it out between the two of them.
Well, yeah.
And then the last big, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are very clear differences there, aren't there? I mean, it was, you know, they're quite obvious differences, aren't there?
Yeah, and the biggest one I didn't even get to is privacy. You know, obviously we're a privacy coin, but I think you'll see that a lot of these projects, privacy is a second thought. You know, and everything that we do it's like in our DNA. So it's like 10 or 15 times harder to do things. Like, how do you host images on a marketplace without actually leaking IP addresses? Like, that's a privacy issue, but you could easily put them on IPFS, which is what OpenBazaar does, but it's a known issue that they leak IP addresses. So, that's logically, not something we would jump to if we're saying we're a privacy project. Same thing with money, right? So if we're going to, this was something brought up this week, was, how are we going to tie, Particle's obviously a volatile, cryptocurrency is volatile. So you want to tie it to like a fiat amount, like US dollar or euro or something. How do you keep that updated without giving away location or different things as the client is using the prices? So, we have to think about that. Like, do we find the resources that give you a day, this is what the prices are in fiat for the day, and then it wipes it at the end of the day, and that kind of stuff. So everything we're doing is harder. So privacy is probably the number one thing out of all 5 of those, but there are 5 clear things I think that make us different.
Well, I was very interested to hear that recently Particle became the first project to become aligned with PIVX in a decentralized manner. Very interested to hear more about that, and I suppose what you'd like to come out of to come from that.
Yeah, so the 2 teams have been really we've known each other for a long time. 7hacks, who's a PIVX guy, definitely has been involved in pre-Shadow Cache days and in the Particle time, and is active even in our community and with our developers in the open development channels. There's never really been we're better than you kind of thing. Like, we respect the privacy that PIVX has implemented in what they're trying to do. One of the new big things they're trying to do is a decentralized exchange. We're trying to do a decentralized marketplaces. We see the need for more of these products in the space. Like I said earlier, having a choice, not necessarily being the one and only, everything else, sucks kind of thing. This is like, we all have the responsibility right now to build this ecosystem and all the pieces in it and what it's going to be in the future. So, we respect that, they're building a decentralized exchange and that we're building the marketplace. And I think that's sort of what the start of it all became, is like, how can we, we're talking about crypto agnosticism, which is basically currency agnostic, which means, why couldn't someone that has PIVX come, even though it's not a PIVX chain project or being on the blockchain, why couldn't they spend their PIVX coins, or ZPIV, even their most private coin, on the marketplace and buy stuff without actually having to use Particle? And the same thing, I think, goes for the decentralized exchange. So with the same goals in mind, I think that's sort of what led to us discussing, what's this alliance going to look like? Maybe we could, use PIVX as our first coin that comes in, and how we can use that. And it's really interesting, actually, to be honest, because there's a privacy layer, ZPIV, on PIVX, and Particle actually has, ring CT, and it could be like a double whammy, for protecting your privacy. If down the road ring CT is known to be faulty, you have the backup of ZPIV that you used for these transactions to have that privacy layer on top of it. So it's kind of like, like a double privacy factor in there. So I think that was the main driver. There's a good relationship between our developers, our community, and I think everybody's end goal is not necessarily to be the one and only, but to actually build these tools and to let users from other communities join in them, and not just be exclusive to your project and that's it.
Yeah, it's exciting. It all makes perfect sense. But Paul, what we always do is we end the podcast with a couple of more quick fire questions, really, that we ask everybody, and we get some really good answers to these questions. So I'm going to ask you this one now. Where do you see crypto being in 12 months from now, and how do you fit into that? I know you've actually touched on it in some of your previous answers, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping it's the mood's lot better in 12 months. I can't see why it wouldn't be. Just been in the space long enough to know that, it'll get better. And this is stuff sticking around. I really think that a big thing's going to be these decentralized apps, which means that there's platforms, not platforms necessarily for doing ICOs and raising funds, but actual working platforms that have actual working applications that are decentralized, that are changing models that have been around and that need to be fixed just with fees or privacy or whatever. I think that's a big thing. I think we're going to see a lot of platforms, or the good platforms start to get a lot of apps on them. That's probably better.
Yeah, all right. No, that's down to that, certainly. And this is the one that no one seems to like answering this question, Paul, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. If you had to go all in on one project, which would it be and why? And it's got to be a project that's already been released.
Yeah, that's a hard one because I work for Particl. Okay, if I were to go on all in on one, I'd be Bitcoin. I mean, that's what got us all here. I think they have an amazing team. And I think a lot of what they're doing relates to a lot of smaller projects. But if all were to go away, I would trust, I'd be all in on Bitcoin. That I think that's just a no-brainer in my mind.
Cryptos, yeah, I actually think that Paul's the first person to say Bitcoin.
Yeah. He definitely is. But he does have a very good point with Bitcoin it's the safest of all bets, that's for sure. It's definitely the safest of all bets. And I guess I guess along with a few of the other things that Paul has said, it kind of is a statement which kind of reflects the project that he works for. Because you see, Particl's been around for quite a long time, so they understand the way crypto really is. So when we asked him just now about where crypto will be in 12 months, he didn't even mention price. And these are the type of things that are reasons why PivX and Particl ended up being aligned, because of the maybe the philosophies that people within those projects hold. So yeah, whilst I'm slightly surprised that he said Bitcoin, I would understand it just as it being a very, very safe bet, because it's one project that pretty much definitely won't fail, I'd say.
Well, Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Just let the listeners know where they can go to find out a bit more about you and Particl.
Sure, yeah. So you can find our website's particl.io. There's no E on Particl. If you're looking, so particl.io, we actually have a really nice wiki that does what is Particl, like a real broad thing. That's particl.wiki. And if you want to stay up to date on our news, particl.news. So super simple web addresses, but those three things will get you really rolling on what we're all about.
Fantastic. Paul Schmizer, Director of Communications for Particl. Real pleasure to speak to you. And hopefully we'll get you back on and see whether you've been right in your prediction for crypto in 12 months' time.
Hey, that sounds great. I really appreciate you guys having me on and enjoyed the questions. And, I hope all the best for you guys as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cryptosi.
Cheers, Paul. Cheers, Tommy.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivx.org.